The grand piano gleamed beneath the soft chandelier light, its polished surface reflecting more than just the room. It carried the weight of unspoken stories. Mark leaned over it, wiping carefully, his apron tied tight, his sleeves rolled up as if the act of cleaning could shield him from everything else. He wasn't just polishing wood and strings, he was polishing away regret, the kind that built up in silence when dreams were left behind. Claire stood a few feet away, her black dress clinging gracefully to her form, her arms resting on her waist with a quiet confidence. She watched him, not because she had to, but because there was something about him, something steady, something grounded, that made her pause. She was used to rooms bending toward her, used to eyes following her wherever she walked, but here was a man too focused on the grain of wood to notice he was being noticed. "Do you ever stop?" she asked lightly, her voice warm and teasing. Mark didn't look up right away. He finished polishing the corner, placed the cloth gently on the piano, then finally turned his gaze toward her. "If I stop, it shows," he said simply. "And then people like you notice." The corner of her lips curved. "People like me, beautiful, well-dressed people with too many eyes watching them," he said, half smiling. His words were honest but not flattering, not in the way men usually spoke to her. She laughed softly, a sound like champagne fizzing. "And what about people like you?" "People like me are supposed to stay in the background," he answered, his tone neither bitter nor self-pitying. "We keep things working so people like you can shine." Something about that struck her differently. She should have let the conversation end there. After all, she had a dinner upstairs, people waiting for her, a life already mapped out, but she found herself moving closer, fingertips brushing the edge of the piano. "And do you ever shine?" she asked quietly. Mark hesitated. His hands, rough from years of work, hovered above the keys. "Once," he admitted. "A long time ago." She tilted her head, sensing a story behind the words. "Show me." He almost said no. Years of discipline, of knowing his place, urged him to remain silent. But the way she looked at him, not as a maid or a mechanic, not as a shadow but as a man, broke something open. Slowly, carefully, he sat at the bench, lifted the lid, and pressed his fingers against the keys. The first notes were hesitant, like a confession. Then they grew stronger, filling the room with something fragile yet powerful. Claire's breath caught as the melody swirled around them. It wasn't the practiced perfection of a professional, it was raw, aching, alive. She closed her eyes, letting it wrap around her like a secret. When the last note lingered into silence, she opened her eyes and whispered, "Why did you ever stop?" He shrugged, his eyes shadowed. "Life doesn't always give you the stage you want. Sometimes it hands you an apron instead." Her heart ached in a way she hadn't expected. She was supposed to go, supposed to leave him there with his piano and his silence. But instead she said, "Play it again, for me. Tonight, when I come back." He raised an eyebrow. "You'll come back." "I will," she promised. And for reasons he couldn't understand, he believed her. That night, after midnight, when the lobby had emptied and the world had gone quiet, she returned. No shoes this time, just bare feet against the marble floor. Mark was still there, as if he hadn't moved, as if he had been waiting. "You kept your promise," he said softly. "I told you I would," she replied. She slipped onto the bench beside him. "Play." And so he did, but this time, he didn't play alone. Claire placed her hand on the keys, awkward and untrained, and he guided her fingers. Together, they made music imperfect and messy, but real. She laughed when she hit the wrong note, and he smiled at the sound, realizing he hadn't smiled like that in years. Night after night, she came back. They shared stories in fragments, her life of luxury that often felt hollow, his life of labor that often felt invisible. They discovered they both carried loneliness, just dressed differently. With each meeting, the distance between their worlds shrank, replaced by a melody only they understood. One evening, she confessed softly, "They all think I have everything, Mark. But when I hear you play, I realize how much I'm missing." He looked at her, his eyes steady. "And when you sit beside me, I realize I haven't lost everything after all." But the world beyond their midnight meetings wasn't kind. Rumors began to spread, about the woman in the black dress seen too often in the lobby, about the hotel worker who lingered too close. The manager warned Mark to keep his distance, to remember his place. Claire's friends whispered that she was wasting her time with someone beneath her. The pressure grew, but so did their bond. They wrote melodies together, leaving scraps of music hidden in the piano like love letters. They dreamed, foolishly perhaps, of a life outside the hotel, where the only stage was each other's presence. Then came the gala. Claire was scheduled to perform, a performance that would define her career. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and jewels, the wealthy gathered like stars too proud to fall. Mark stood in the shadows, tasked with tuning the piano. But when Claire began to play, something inside her rebelled against the script. She began with Beethoven, yes, but halfway through, her fingers found a different path. They found their song, the one born from late nights and laughter, from imperfection and truth. The audience froze, unsure whether it was brilliance or madness. But Claire didn't falter. Halfway through, she turned her head, searching the shadows. Her eyes found Mark's, and she whispered just loud enough for him to hear, "Play with me." Every rule, every warning, every boundary collapsed. Mark stepped onto the stage. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then he sat beside her, and together they played, not for the crowd, not for approval, but for each other. The room erupted, some with applause, some with outrage, but neither of them cared. In that moment, they weren't a hotel worker and a glamorous performer. They were simply two souls who had finally found the melody they were meant to play. After the gala, consequences came fast. Mark was dismissed, told to collect his things. Claire was warned about contracts, about reputation, about the cost of rebellion. But when she found him outside, standing with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, waiting under the night sky, she smiled. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Terrified," he admitted. "Good," she whispered, slipping her hand into his. "So am I. Let's be terrified together." They left the city that night, found a small town by a quiet river, where they rented a modest room with space for a piano. They played for neighbors, for children, for anyone who wanted to listen, not polished perfection, but music that breathed. And slowly, word spread not of scandal, but of love, of two people who had traded everything for the only thing that mattered, each other. Years later, in that little town, whenever they played their song, the townspeople called it, the after. Because it was what came after midnight meetings, after the gala, after the fear, after the leap of faith. And every time, when the last note faded, Claire would look at Mark and whisper, "After, always after." And he would smile, pressing a soft kiss to her hand before answering, "After, forever."